Hi everybody, welcome back to another one. So in the last video, we talked about external respiration, specifically the gas exchange portion. In this video, we're going to talk about ventilation and perfusion matching, but we're also going to touch on things that affect the rate of gas transfer, okay? And maybe incorporate a little bit about clinical disease. Okay, so if you like this video, please subscribe, please like, and if you have any questions, comment down below. I will answer to the best of my abilities. Okay, so what does gas exchange look like? Right, we've already talked about gas exchange, but the bare bones of it is you get some oxygen coming in from the atmosphere, okay? And that oxygen will have to diffuse into the red blood cell, right? Here's the red blood cell. And then you got to have some CO2 coming into the alveoli, and that CO2 is going to have to get expired out, okay? So this is the kind of bare bones of gas exchange here. Okay, what is the space in blue that I highlighted? This space in blue is, of course, going to be the interstitial fluid. Okay, the interstitial fluid. Now, with regards to, and I'll write it here just to have some space. So, interstitial fluid. With regards to everything in this simplified diagram, we got to think about what are the things that actually affect the rate of gas transfer here. Okay, well, there's a multitude of things. Believe me, there's a lot of things. Okay, so what are they? Well, it's actually pretty easy. You just got to look at the pathway that this gas has to go through to actually get here, okay? All right. So the first thing that this gas is going to have to do is, let's take oxygen, is going to have to go through the alveolar membrane, okay? It's going to have to go through the alveolar membrane, okay? Alrighty, what else? Then, after it passes through that alveolar membrane, which is, by the way, made up of type 1 cells, guys. It's made up of this type 1 single layer, very thin cells, okay? So after it passes through that layer, where does it go? It makes its way out to this interstitial fluid, okay? So the next one is the interstitial fluid. Awesome. After it goes to the interstitial fluid, it's got to go through the capillary. So it's got to go through the capillary membrane. Capillary membrane. And again, when we start our cardiovascular section, we'll talk about that the capillary is actually made up of these things called the endothelial cells. Very thin single layer. Then, after it makes it through that capillary membrane, it's got to interact with this little fluid that's in here. And that's the plasma. It's got to go through the plasma. After it makes it through the plasma, it's now going to make it through the red blood cell membrane. The red blood cell membrane. And now it's actually inside of the red blood cell, okay, where it can actually be carried. And we'll talk about, in our next video, talking about oxygen and CO2 transfer. Okay, transport, sorry. All right, so this is kind of what the oxygen is going to have to go through. Okay, this is the oxygen. It's going to have to go through all this. And the CO2, in turn, will have to go the opposite direction. Okay, so that's that. Okay, but really the question is, if this is the things that affect the rate of gas transfer, well, can't all this stuff go wrong as well? And you'd absolutely be right, they would. What is a common disease here that might affect the above? And there's many, by the way. But one that I want to choose to focus on here is going to be a disease of the interstitial fluid here, and that's called the interstitial lung disease, okay? It basically constitutes the thickening of this interstitial fluid layer, which makes it hard for gas exchange. So let's take a look at these three alveoli, okay? You know how we usually draw an alveoli as like this little big circle, but you guys know that an alveolus actually has like these little foldings, right? It's got a super high surface area where gas exchange can occur here. It can occur here, 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 right? It's such a specialized giant thing. Okay, it kind of looks like a grape, right? There's little pockets for gas exchange everywhere. Okay, and you can see that the gas exchange occurs here. It can occur here, many other places. But there's two scenarios here where we have disease. In this scenario, we actually have a loss of surface area. We have a decreased surface area. What disease do you guys know that actually has this? Well, If you're screaming at me saying it's emphysema, you're absolutely correct. It is emphysema, okay? Emphysema definitely has this problem where they have a loss of surface area, and that's, we've talked about it a little bit before. It's because there's these elastase enzymes that will come here and break down these elastin fibers that make up the alveolar walls, okay? Thus decreasing the surface area and then lowering the elasticity at the same time, and increasing the compliance of this emphysematous lung. Neither here or there, but take a look at it. If my surface area is down, then my gas exchange is going to be affected, don't you think? There's actually less space for exchanging gas, so guess what's going to happen? I can only do it through here instead of doing it here as well, okay? So that's just a depiction of how this guy has super high surface area because it's normal, whereas this guy has low surface area and it can only do gas exchange through one region. If that is the case, okay, we're going to have to, we can actually change the concentration of these gases, okay? So perhaps you would have a lot of CO2 building up in the blood and you would actually have low oxygen because this gas exchange is going to be decreased due to a low surface area, okay? So surface area is big when it comes to affecting this gas exchange. The other thing though is, again, this interstitial layer. Notice how thick this interstitial fluid layer is as compared to this guy and this guy, okay? And this guy, let's say they have a normal looking alveolus, normal surface area, but they actually can't get that gas across. So take a look at how much harder it is to diffuse that gas over, okay? It takes way longer. It takes way longer. All right. And again, this poses something we call a diffusion limitation. Because if you guys think back to the last video, we said that gas exchange, right, at this level here was going to be called diffusion. So this is causing a diffusion limitation. Okay. Because maybe the oxygen or the CO2 can't actually make it past this layer to go into the alveoli or to the blood. Okay. This is very big. This is another thing that can affect this, and we're going to actually focus a lot on this diffusion limitation. Okay, so that's going to cover it with the things that affect the rate of gas exchange. What about this scenario? Have you guys heard of ventilation and perfusion? I know you've heard of ventilation. That's alveolar ventilation. What about perfusion in Q? We'll talk about this a little bit more when we talk about cardiovascular system, but Q is a symbol for perfusion here, or blood flow. Okay, perfusion or blood flow. Whenever a tissue is being given blood, we say that that tissue is being perfused. So ventilation perfusion, and you see that I put a division sign here. We take ventilation and we make a ratio out of that with perfusion. The regular ventilation perfusion ratio should be around 1 or 0.8. This can change, it just depends, okay? But let's just say, for sake of simplicity, it's around 1, meaning that I have a ventilation of 1 liters per minute, and I have a perfusion of 1 liters per minute, and so the ratio here is 1, okay? 1 to 1. Here's a normal scenario. In a normal scenario, I have this guy, and I have air coming in. Cool. And that air that came in, right, so I have some air, all right, will participate in that gas exchange right here. Okay, again, some air here. It'll participate in the gas exchange, and everybody's happy. Okay? Awesome. Now, let's take another scenario. In this scenario, let's say that I cannot get air in to this alveolus, so it goes up to that alveolus, okay? And actually, let's just make it look like this. We just straight up can't get any air out, so it gets moved over to this side. Now, what about the perfusion? Is the perfusion working fine? Well, it seems to be. We have blood going through all around this thing. Okay, so the blood is coming in, it's perfusing this area, but there's no air. There is no air. So in this scenario, what's happening to our ventilation and perfusion? Our ventilation is 0, but our perfusion is 1. Okay, which means my overall ratio will actually drop down. So we'll say it's going to be less than 1, okay? Because the numerator went down, so that's going to happen. Okay, and you know what? Let's do it like this. This goes down, whereas this guy didn't change. Okay, that's that. You know what we call this scenario? Where we actually have a complete shut off of this alveoli. There's no air. We call this a shunt. And I like to remember this in a way where the blood actually is getting shunted elsewhere, and the air might get shunted elsewhere as well, okay? So that's how that's happening, a shunt. And what scenarios could this happen? For example, let's say you have a giant mucus plug here, okay? For example, chronic bronchitis, let's say there's a hyper secretion of mucus and you happen to just block the airway a lot, okay? And this happens. That could be an example, okay? So I'll put mucus plug here, mucus plug. Let's take the opposite scenario. Let's say I can get air in, but I don't actually have perfusion. Why might I not have perfusion? Okay, so let's take this little capillary bed here, okay? And let's say upstream of that capillary bed, or in that capillary bed, is an embolus. Okay, you guys are familiar with an embolus. It's just a blood clot that has dislodged and is traveling throughout your circulation. Okay, that's very dangerous. Okay, and since we're in this, pulmonary system, we'll call it a pulmonary embolism or a pulmonary embolus here. Okay, this guy can come here and he can frick up your circulation. So look at this, the blood that's supposed to be coming in here will get stuck there. It can't come in no more, meaning what? You're not getting any perfusion through this bad boy. What's happening then? Is that air that is in here, is it going to go and participate in gas exchange? No, there's going to be no gas exchange here. Okay? Whereas this scenario, we have gas exchange occurring because we have proper air and we have proper ventilation and perfusion, so it's going to happen. Okay, so that's that. Now, what is this scenario called where I have proper ventilation but no perfusion? Okay, so I have ventilation normally, but my Q is down or 0. Okay, in that scenario, again, I got 1 over 0. In this case, I had 0 over 1. But either way, in this scenario, the ratio is going to be greater than 1 because the denominator went down, which increases the total number. Okay? All right. Now, you know what we call this? We actually call this alveolar / pure dead space. Guys, this is not the same as anatomical dead space that we had on the upper airways. This anatomical dead space is very different. So the alveolar dead space can actually add on to your anatomical dead space, and it can contribute to your total dead space, right? So we have anatomical dead space plus alveolar dead space, which can actually increase or add up to something called your total physiological dead space. Total physiological dead space. And you can see that the anatomical dead space, like I said, is usually fixed, okay? But this alveolar dead space can actually contribute to your total physiological dead space, right? You can increase this, that's gonna, frick you up really bad. Okay, so that's the scenario here. Now, something that you got to take into account is going to be, with this shunt, if I'm not exchanging oxygen, right? Because here's what's happening, right? Oxygen's coming in, okay? And you got the partial pressure of alveolar oxygen here, and that's going to exchange with the, the venous oxygen, which was actually around here, the venous oxygen, to maintain the arteriolar partial pressure of oxygen, right? You guys remember that from the last video. If you don't, go back and watch that. Now, if this is happening, right, normally, if we don't have this, what's going to happen here? What do you think is going to happen? In this scenario, we can actually lead to a low partial pressure of arteriolar oxygen, and that is not good. That is not good. Okay, that is not what you want. Okay. So that's going to be a bit about ventilation and perfusion matching. Okay, not too tough of a concept to get your head around. Now, let's add on to this concept a little bit more. Okay, with the fact that I want to ask you guys a question. Do you think the ventilation and perfusion is the same all throughout the lung. Do you think it's the same all throughout this lung? Yes or no? Okay, well, if you're saying no, then pat yourself on the back here because it's not the same. Okay, it is absolutely not the same. And there are many reasons for that. One of which is gravity. Okay, you guys know gravity, it pushes down on us when we're standing up. When we're standing up, right, vertically, standing up, gravity's pushing down on us. So what do you think is going to happen to the blood flow, to the perfusion of this lung? Okay, if I were to split it down the middle, which part would you say has the highest perfusion? The top part or the bottom part? Well, since gravity is pulling down, all the blood is going to start getting pulled all the way down to the bottom of this lung and start pooling down here. So this side is going to have a pretty high perfusion, whereas this side is going to have a low perfusion. Okay? But what about ventilation? Okay, you guys know something? Gravity, while it has a strong effect on the liquid, which is blood, it actually doesn't affect gases as much, okay? So it affects blood more than gas. So let's write that down here. Affects blood more than gas. So really, the ventilation at the top might be pretty high or higher than the ventilation at the bottom of the lung, okay? Can you notice how we've created a mismatch here? Now, this is a normal physiological setting, by the way. This is not including shunts or alveolar dead spaces, okay? Let's get rid of this so we can, have it pretty, okay? So this is not contributing to that shunt or alveolar dead spaces, okay? But there are areas that perfusion is slightly higher than the ventilation, and the perfusion in this area, for example, is lower than the ventilation, okay? So this is normal. This occurs in the lung. How do you fix this, though? What is the mechanism that our body has to actually fix this? Okay, well, there is a cool mechanism in place. And let's take this example here, okay? We keep this split on the lung here, okay? And we drag it over here. Let's say, the lung comes in, it branches out to the alveoli at the top here. So this one, and the alveoli at the bottom here, okay? Keeping with the same story here. Okay, if that's the scenario, guys, then, let's say you have these blood vessels feeding all around it. If the ventilation is lower here, but the Q is higher, okay, and I'll write this here. The Q is high here, but the ventilation is low. I want to actually balance that out, so I lower my Q to match my ventilation, okay? I want to do that, okay? I want to change this into Q that's low and V that's low to match my number. How do I do that? Well, we have arterioles that feed into the pulmonary capillaries. What's going to actually happen is I'm going to actually constrict those arterioles. I'm going to press down on them, okay? And this is an intrinsic mechanism. And I'll tell you why. Arterioles, we'll talk about this again in the cardiovascular, but arterioles have what we know as smooth muscle, this smooth muscle that actually kind of lines all around these arterioles, these blood vessels, okay? And in the presence of low ventilation, they're getting less oxygen. In the presence of less oxygen, these pulmonary arterioles are going to start constricting. They're going to start contracting. You know what it's called when a vessel contracts? So vessel translates to vaso, and lowering the lumen, or this, circle here, that's going to be called constriction, okay? So this effect is actually called pulmonary arterial hypoxic vasoconstriction. So one more time. There's low ventilation at the bottom of the lung, okay? Which means there's actually less oxygen getting to these pulmonary arterioles. In response to that, the pulmonary arterioles will contract their smooth muscle cell, which leads to vasoconstriction. Okay? And what is that going to do? What is that going to do to the blood flow that it was initially very high here? It's going to redirect it, guys. It's going to redirect that blood flow elsewhere. Where's elsewhere? Up here. Okay, so that blood flow will now be around here and around here. Okay, what was the problem up here? The problem up here was that we had actually low perfusion. So in order to match this perfusion to my ventilation, what happens? I vasoconstrict down here so I can match my perfusion to my ventilation down here, and I redirect the blood flow up here, so now the blood flow is high and the ventilation's high, and they match. Isn't this beautiful? Isn't this beautiful? Now, with this mechanism in place, I was actually able to match my ventilation and perfusion. That's called VQ matching. Okay, VQ matching. All right, ventilation and perfusion matching. Right, and a great example of this, by the way, could have been that the VQ ratio up here was around 3, okay? Because this was very low and this was normal, okay? So this would have been about 3. The VQ ratio here might have been less than or equal to 1, okay? Probably less than 1, though. And we actually brought these closer to 1. With this mechanism in place, we actually brought it closer to 1. Now, by no means is all of the lungs still going to be equal to 1. Even when we have this mechanism in place, by no means is that going to happen. But this actually rescues this ratio a bit more than if we didn't have this mechanism. If we didn't have this mechanism in place, then boy, we'd be in trouble. Okay, that would be a very inefficient gas exchange occurring. Okay, so one last time, let's talk about this pulmonary arterial hypoxic vasoconstriction. Okay, this is a reflex, by the way. Okay, this is a reflex. Why is it a reflex? Because it reacts to the low ventilation. The low ventilation means there's actually going to be low partial pressure of alveolar O2, and because of that, there's actually a low partial pressure of arterial oxygen. Okay, so low PaO2 and low P big AO2. Okay, both of these, specifically this one, is going to cause a constriction of that arteriole to redirect the blood flow elsewhere. Okay, that's going to allow for ventilation and perfusion matching here and here. Okay, awesome. And one more time, even with this mechanism in place, we're still going to have more blood pooling at the bottom of the lung, but it would actually be less than if we didn't have this mechanism in place. Okay, so finally, we're going to talk about a very cool concept. This concept is always very fascinating to me. We're going to talk about the transit time, or actually how long it takes to bring the partial pressure of oxygen in the venous blood from 40 millimeters of mercury all the way up to 100 millimeters of mercury. How long does that take, and how long does the blood actually stay in the capillary? Very interesting concept. Sometimes hard to grasp, but I'm going to try my best to make it very simple. Oh, but one more thing before we actually get into this is that I mentioned how gravity is working down on us when we're vertical, and this effect is happening. When you're actually lying down, okay, the force is actually spread all around, so perfusion is actually more equal all throughout the lung, okay? Ventilation and perfusion is actually more equal all throughout the lung when you're lying down. So your lung is no longer vertical, it's horizontal. And for example, during exercise as well, your ventilation and perfusion is much more equal and much more similar to when the lung is actually horizontal, because at rest, there are certain capillaries surrounding the lung, or surrounding the alveoli, that are actually not open, okay? They're not open. But, and I literally mean they're not open, that their blood is just not going through them, because we don't need them at rest. But then when you start exercising, the cardiac output, the amount of blood that the heart is pumping out, is so much higher than what it is at rest that it's going to force these capillaries open, increasing the perfusion. Okay, so again, it's very interesting stuff. But we won't talk about it here. We'll talk about it in our exercise physiology playlist that's up and coming. Okay, now let's talk about this very cool concept, very awesome concept. Here's going to be the alveoli, okay? And here is going to be the capillary, okay? This is the capillary with a red blood cell moving all the way through it, okay? Because you guys know the red blood cell is what's carrying that oxygen, okay? So here's that red blood cell moving through this capillary, okay? And it's coming from the deoxygenated pulmonary artery, right? You guys remember this? It's coming from the deoxygenated pulmonary artery, and at this end here, it's going to be moving towards the oxygenated pulmonary vein, okay? So, just to get you guys acquainted to the graph, this part of the graph is at the deoxygenated pulmonary artery. This entire middle part is at the level of the capillary, and this part is at the end of the capillary when we're finally oxygenated, moving towards the pulmonary vein, okay? On the y-axis, we have the partial pressure of oxygen in millimeters of mercury. On the x-axis, we have the time in seconds that the blood is remaining in the capillary, okay? One thing I have to tell you, and let's do it in this color, is at rest. At rest, meaning we're not exercising, okay, just regularly chilling, it takes about 0.75 seconds. Well, not it takes, but the blood is inside of that capillary bed for 0.75 seconds in resting conditions, okay? In resting conditions. So let's take that scenario for a second and let's follow it along. Here in purple is a regular guy, normal individual. In a normal individual, right? What do you guys remember what the partial pressure of the venous oxygen was, right, at rest, or the deoxygenated? It was about 40. So at 40, right, it's coming, it's still traveling through that pulmonary artery, still deoxygenated, and boom, it makes it to the capillary. And as it's making its way to the capillary, it's doing gas exchange, boom. It hits 100 here. How long did that take? Let's track that. Let's track how long it took. Let's track how long that took. Boom. This is awesome. It took 0.3 seconds to take that partial pressure of oxygen at 40 and bring it up to 100. 40 to 100 takes 0.3 seconds. Even though the blood remains inside of this capillary for 0.75 seconds, it took us 0.3 seconds to bring that partial pressure of oxygen from 40 to 100. Notice how it doesn't change from here, right? Because in the last video, I mentioned that it reaches equilibrium at this point. This is awesome. This is awesome. We reach the desired partial pressure in 0.3 seconds. Okay. But let's take another scenario. Let's say that, let's erase this. Let's say that our transit time, the amount of time I spend in the capillary, drops down from 0.75 to 0.45. When might that happen? That happens, guys, during exercise. If that happens during exercise, what happens? I now actually, instead of spending 0.75 in the capillary bed, I actually spend only 0.45. Is that still enough time to reach oxygenation? Is that time, this 0.45 time in the capillary, is that still enough time for me to oxygenate my blood? Yes, it absolutely is. Look at that. Perfect. It takes me 0.3 seconds to take my blood from 40 all the way up to 100, and if I start exercising, my transit time drops to about 0.45, and that's because, again, the cardiac output increases from the heart, and the speed at which the blood flow is going is increasing. Therefore, the time that I spend in the capillary is less. But it's still adequate for oxygenation. Interesting. Very interesting. But now let's take a very crazy example, actually. There are certain extremely elite athletes, elite level athletes, that when they start exercising, their heart is so strong that the speed at which the blood travels during their exercise is insane. And this is only in elite athletes. Their transit time, instead of being 0.45 during exercise, is 0.25 seconds. You might be thinking, hey, wait a minute. If it's 0.25 seconds, they will not have gone through complete oxygenation. They will not have gone through complete oxygenation. They're not at 100 millimeters of mercury anymore. And you'd be absolutely right. It still takes us 0.3 seconds to oxygenate. But these guys, their heart is so strong that their transit time in the capillary drops down to 0.25 seconds. So these guys experience a little bit of hypoxia. Whether that impacts performance or not, we still don't know. But that's just a cool tidbit that I wanted to share with you guys. So let's forget about all this exercise and elite athlete and stuff, and let's go back to being at rest. When you're at rest, it takes you 0.75 seconds in the capillary, but you oxygenate your blood at 0.3 seconds. Now, instead of looking at this normal guy, let's go ahead and look at this poor individual who has a diffusion limitation. Didn't we talk about a diffusion limitation earlier in this video? We did. Somebody with interstitial lung disease. So let's take this guy and let's say he has interstitial lung disease, which again, they have a diffusion limitation. They have a hard time getting that oxygen from the alveoli into the blood and the CO2 out. This is what their curve would look like. They're starting out from this 40. They go up, 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 and oh my goodness, at 0.3 seconds, they're not even fully oxygenated. It actually takes them almost the entire time to fully oxygenate their blood. Okay? That's pretty crazy. That's pretty crazy. It takes them a long time to do that. Okay? So you can think the implications this might have for starting exercise and stuff. Okay? Okay. So this is a graph with diffusion limitation. This is a graph with no diffusion limitation. All right, guys. With all of that said, okay, that's going to finish this video, okay? We talked about, things affecting gas exchange. We talked about ventilation and perfusion matching, both in disease scenarios and regular scenarios. And we also talked about the transit time it takes for partial pressure of oxygen to go from 40 millimeters of mercury to 100 millimeters of mercury, okay? That's going to finish it for this video. If you guys like the video, please like, comment, subscribe, okay? And I will see you in the next video when we talk about oxygen and CO2 transport.